Welcome. This is Dr. Garais, MED210, 7 NAX, Thursday evening, 6 p.m., October 29th. And what is due this evening? Task 2, Discussion 2, and Lesson 2. Late protocols will start if you submit stuff tomorrow morning. But if you can submit stuff by tonight, I'll look at it again like at 10 o'clock at night tonight. Might buy you an extra couple hours. Really shouldn't get into that habit, but hey, stuff happens. Task 3, Discussion 3, Lesson 3. Let's just jump right in. So we're going to be talking about, and of course, protocol stand, like if you have a question, I'll be monitoring the chat, or you unmute yourself and like, hey, Dr. Garris, I have a question. So there are two communication systems in your body. You have your endocrine system and your nervous system. Your nervous system, the neat thing about the nervous system is it sends communications to your brain and to your body very, very quickly. But the thing about the nervous system, it's short-lived. With the endocrine system, it's slow, but its response and its effects are long-term or longer term. And the endocrine system is important. Endo, meaning within, crin means a secretion. So you essentially need to know what hormones are involved with what function and what is their target tissue. So if you can answer all three of those questions, you should be pretty good on this particular chapter. And for this particular chapter, these task 3 videos are nice. We're going to talk about a little bit of autoimmune, a little bit about the autonomic nervous system, and we'll expand on the autonomic nervous system regarding fight or flight a little bit later in the term. So endocrine system, chemical signaling, what are hormones and what exactly are there? And there's this endocrine physiology lab here in your task. Don't do the laboratory, but there are wonderful, wonderful notes that mimic your textbook. And it's going to mimic the things that I'm already talking about. So I'm already talking about the nervous system and the endocrine system, and the way the endocrine system, the way the nervous system talks to you or communicates to you is via neural signals known as an action potential. It's essentially electricity. But the main way that the endocrine system communicates is via hormones. Hormones are these chemical messengers, and they could be proteins, peptides, amino acids, steroids. They could be a whole bunch of different types of chemicals. But the one thing that's really important to know about these chemicals is that they're highly specific. They're produced and or stored, depending, by glands, and then they have secretion, and it gets secreted out. And the way it gets to its target tissue is it floats around in the blood, floats around in your system, and it latches on to things that match up to it chemically. Just like we talked about in Anatomy and Physiology 1, how the specific ligand binding, or remember the lock and key analogy that we talked about in enzymes, it's the same exact concept with hormones, and it's also the same exact concept with pharmacology and drugs. Now, endocrine glands, endo meaning within, that gets secreted into within our body, and that'll be the main topic for today, and that goes into our bloodstream. But exocrine, exo means out, those are substances that are that get secreted outside, and the examples were our sweat glands and our sebaceous glands in our skin, and that we already discussed. So as a quick review regarding diffusion and osmosis, diffusion is simply chemicals moving from a place of higher concentration to a place of lower concentration. And it's the same thing for osmosis, but with osmosis, it's through a semi-permeable membrane. And a classic semi-permeable membrane that we all know and love from Anatomy and Physiology 1 is our bilipid layer our the cell wall. So this has a lot to do with how chemicals go in and out of our body. All right. So with that being said, let's go into chapter 21.6. So these notes are nice, and they're like the simpler versions of this chapter here that we're about to go into, which is 21.6. I'm trying this term to use your OpenStax textbook a little bit more because it has pretty pictures and has the same things that that I um, that I utilize when I Google search certain diagrams and things of that matter. Also keeps me honest because those of you who had me before know I could easily start talking about other things. So 21.6 is overactive immune response. Okay. Oh no, this is already getting into hypersensitivity. I thought it said 21.6. Maybe I am wrong. Let me look back at task 3. Maybe I got the number wrong. Or maybe it might be the older textbook. No, it's the right thing, autoimmune responses. So we're going to look at that in a moment. Let me try to find the endocrine stuff. Cardiovascular. Energy. Regulation of the nervous system. So somatic, endocrine. There you go. Okay. Let's look at the endocrine. So we already know what the endocrine is, and we already know what a hormone is, and we know that the way it gets to its target tissue is through a specific interaction with with its chemical shape or its chemical signature, in much the same way that drugs work on the body, and in the same way that enzymes work on the body. Like for example, we already know that amylase is a specific enzyme only towards starches or carbohydrates. It won't break down proteins and it won't break down fats, right? And the same thing with when the endocrine system releases a hormone, it's going to go to the target tissue, and it's not going to mess with the surrounding tissues because it's not specific. So it's chemical versus the nervous system, which is chemical and electrical. Of course, we talked about hormones, and there's chemicals too in the nervous systems, but they're different. Now, the distance traveled, it's variable, but the distance traveled for the nervous system is relatively short. Response time for the nervous system is fast. Endocrine, it's relatively fast, but it's typically slow. And of course, the target tissue for endocrine, hence the term endo, is always on the inside. So here's some, let's get to the big chart. There you go. Okay. So in our brain, you have your pituitary gland. And in the pituitary gland is known as the master gland. It's like Lord of the Rings. It's the one master gland to control all of them, right? So if you've got a brain tumor and it's near the pituitary, it's going to cause a whole bunch of problems. So you have the anterior portion and then the posterior portion. So let's go through the anterior part of the pituitary. One hormone that gets released is growth hormone. And of course, what's it going to do? It's going to promote growth. PRL is prolactin. And if you remember your medical terminology, pro meaning to support or to promote, lactin, milk. So it's part of the milk letdown reflex in women. So it promotes milk production. Another is thyroid stimulating hormone, and it stimulates the thyroid hormone release. And what does that mean? It stimulates this thyroid hormones, T3 and T4. thyroxine and triiodothyroxine, but we like calling it T3, T4. And what does the thyroid do? It stimulates or increases your basal metabolic rate. And what's that? Your metabolic rate is the rate at which you burn, not burn, but change oxygen and your food, right? So if you have a very fast metabolic rate, you'll be thinner. You won't be storing fats because you'll be using that up for metabolism. And the one that starts it all is the TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, and that's in your anterior pituitary. And then, of course, your thyroid is in the anterior portion of your neck, and that's going to release T3, T4. We love doing thyroid, what do you call that? Thyroid assays or thyroid tests, especially if my patient has tachycardia. If my patient has like heart stuff, we want to differentiate. Maybe there might be some heart issues going on. And that's why we all, like every time your patient has a cardiac issue, especially something like tachycardia, we always investigate to see if the thyroid is abnormal. And one of the things we look at is TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone from our pituitary anterior portion of it, and from our thyroid as well. ACTH, short for adrenocorticotropic hormone. Those of you who took medical terminology, I told you will need it. So adreno means your adrenal gland. Cortico means your cortex. Trophic means growth. So it is a hormone from your anterior pituitary, and it's going to stimulate hormone release in your adrenal cortex of the gland that's right above your kidneys. Hence the term adrenal. And we're going to talk about ACTH, since it's related to above the kidneys and the kidneys itself. It deals with a whole bunch of things, and we're going to talk about that when we talk about water and salt retention. FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. Now, what's a follicle? Follicle is typically refers to the female ovum before it becomes a full-blown egg. That's a follicle. So you have FSH stimulates the production of gamete, which is in female egg. But in male, the FSH will be, of course, sperm production. LH is a luteinizing hormone, and that stimulates androgen production by your gonads. And androgen is the hormone that deals with male secondary sexual characteristics. But also, female also has LH as well. Now, remember, when we're going to talk about male and female reproduction, all men and women have all the same hormones, but it's what makes us all different is we have them in different levels, and they get released at different times. For example, FSH and LH, this is a beautiful both A and B question, because it has to deal with not only gamete production and androgen production. This also signals ovulation on the 14th day of your typical 30-day menstrual cycle. Now, the posterior pituitary stuff, there's only two biggies. ADH, which is the antidiuretic hormone. Now, that's easy. Use your medical terminology powers. The prefix anti means against. Diuresis is urination. So think about times where you don't want to pee. It's times where you want to reabsorb water. Like, for example, classic example is you're in the desert, and you need all the water you can. So your posterior pituitary gland will release ADH and tell your kidneys, hey, don't pee. I need that water. Okay? Another posterior pituitary, some of you mommies in the audience know what oxytocin is. It stimulates the uterine contractions for childbirth. Okay? Now, maybe some of you had something called a pit drip for Pitocin. Pitocin chemically looks just like oxytocin. Once this is in your bloodstream, your target tissue is your uterus, and then once your uterus gets stimulated, what happens to the uterus? It contracts violently, and that's where you have the contractions and the intense pain. As so I've witnessed and heard. I'm a guy, so I don't know anything about that. So if you look at the posterior pituitary, there's only two. So the rest of these, this looks like a beautiful all of the above question, doesn't it? Now you don't have to know what kind of protein or peptide it is. Just need to know, like I stated a minute ago, what the hormone is, where it's from, and what does it do for us. And you could see more than half of them, if you know your medical terminology powers, right, you could pretty much figure out what they do. Now your thyroid. Your thyroid also has calcitonin, and that's easy. Calci looks like calcium. Calcitonin reduces blood calcium levels. So their thyroid, along with your bone, have a lot to do with your body's resorption of calcium and your body's calcium levels. Now, another gland that's right next to your thyroid, hence the term parathyroid, that also deals with calcium levels. And the easiest way to do this is calcitonin tones down the calcium. Parathyroid pumps up the calcium. That's how I remember it. You could figure out your way, but I've been thinking it that way. Tone down your calcium. Parathyroid, pump your calcium. And this is your thyroid and your parathyroid are part of your calcium homeostasis. And we're going to learn in when we talk about the muscles that calcium is very important, not only for bones, it is the main, it's one of the main things that help us have muscle contraction. That's why they always have, milk does the body good for strong muscles and bones. So that's a beautiful both A and B question. Your adrenal cortex, aldosterone, increases blood sodium levels. Okay, that's important for water resorption, because remember, wherever salt goes, water goes. And we'll be talking about momentarily about the RAA system, or the renin angiotensin aldosterone system. And that's from your adrenal cortex, meaning the little gland that's above your kidneys. Al pertaining to above your kidneys. Another thing that's above your kidneys that also deals with glucose levels. This is sodium levels, this is glucose levels, and that's cortisol, also known as cortisone or corticosterone. Okay, so that's kind of important, because if I need sugar, this thing has to get released. And we're going to be also talking about your adrenal gland and this thing called adrenaline, also known as epinephrine. It's called adrenaline in the UK, but here it's called epinephrine. And epinephrine will do what? They will increase these things, and it doesn't mean. And we're going to talk about how when you need that energy, when you're having adrenaline, right? And if you've already watched the task videos, we're going to be talking about how emotion relates to endocrine system, and how the endocrine system can also relate to your immune system. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Your adrenal medulla, that's epinephrine and norepinephrine, right? Now, the autonomic nervous system, there's two stages. There's sympathetic and there's parasympathetic. The sympathetic nervous system is the part of your nervous system that deals with fight or flight response. So that moment when when you got to go fight somebody, or when it's time to run away from your neighbor's pit bull, right? That's when you have epinephrine and norepinephrine. That's why when you do some cocaine, you get really, really agitated, and it also comes with that same euphoric state. How many of you here, since it's Halloween, I wish COVID wasn't around, because one of the things that my family likes to do, we like going to those, those haunted houses and haunted cornfields, because one of my things that I love, I love being scared, and it gives you a rush, doesn't it? Well, it gives me a rush. Sometimes it might just totally freak people out. but epinephrine and norepinephrine is part of that. So these are what? These are hormones that signal the fight or flight, or help stimulate the fight or flight response, and those are from the adrenal glands. So you could see here how, wow, really important the adrenal glands are. Your pineal gland secretes melatonin, melanin, right? Darkness. That's about your sleep cycles. Your pineal gland is responsible for what they call your circadian rhythm, right? This weekend, we're going to be pushing back clocks, and it's going to be messing with our circadian rhythm, our day-night cycle. And some of you work in the medical field, work all night. I'm not sure if this is the class. I had a student call me at 9:30 p.m., right? But they were just starting their shift, right? And that melatonin deals with that. Pancreas, very, very important, right? Located in your left upper quadrant, right underneath your stomach. It goes the insulin and glucagon. There are other hormones in the pancreas, but these are the two main ones. Now, insulin gets released when I've eaten a big meal. So after I've eaten a meal, I need insulin to open up the doors of my cells so that glucose can go in. So when you have insulin in your system, it should reduce your blood glucose levels. Now, if I haven't eaten in a while, right? Most of you probably haven't eaten in a while. It's already 6 o'clock. Probably the last time you ate was, this morning, right? Especially if you're in the medical field, probably the last time you ate was probably 4 a.m. this morning. You are probably releasing glucagon, and that increases blood glucose levels. Glucagon tells your fat cells in your liver, hey, can you make me some glucose because I don't have any? Now, glucagon is really cool if you're not in a starvation state. But let's say, for example, you haven't eaten in like more than 12 hours, more than 14 hours. Well, glucagon is now going to tell the fat cells to make something called ketones. And ketones are very neurotoxic. That's why when you look at that commercial, you're not you when you're hungry. That's why when you haven't eaten in like a day or more than a half day or a day or two, think about the last time you didn't eat for a while, right? You get highly irritated, you get confused, it's hard to concentrate because we already know that we need oxygen and glucose, and those are the two things that our brain loves. And the brain does not like ketones. That's why starving yourself out and Atkins diet, the original one, Atkins 1, that's why they modified it and toned it down to Atkins 2 because it's extremely dangerous, especially for diabetics. It's a really interesting way to go into a coma. And that coma for diabetics is called a ketotic coma because the ketones are neurotoxic. It puts the brain in a very bad place chemically. And if the brain doesn't like it, what will the brain do? It'll turn itself off. Of course, testes, right? Get testosterone, just like, those eugenic commercials, which, by the way, you can't get testosterone by eating it, or, you can try to inject it into you, but it's not a good idea because it has a lot of negative effects on the heart, and it also has a lot horrific effects on your adrenal glands. But if you get testosterone, it develops male secondary sex characteristics. Now, what does that mean? All of us are either male or female, no matter how you gender identify yourself with. So if you have XX chromosome, you are female biologically. It goes, and if I pump you full of, it goes, typically, if I don't pump you full of steroids, and you should have a lot of estrogens, right? And progesterone. So you should develop female secondary sexual characteristics. But what if I did that? I pumped a whole bunch of estrogens and progesterone in a male who has an XY chromosome. Like if you did it to me, I will start having a voice, and then I'll have, I almost wasn't able to go back from that. Then I'll have fat deposition, not where it typically is in my gut. It'll be on the side of my thighs and my butt, and I will start having a different shape. Okay. Now, maybe some of you seen, not to make fun of, who am I kidding? I'm making fun of him. You know the CrossFit, these CrossFit champions, Reebok CrossFit champions, these women, it's super obvious that they all took some sort of performance enhancing drug, because a lot of it has testosterone in it. So what happens to these women? They start building massive amounts of muscle mass. They start having the jutting of the jaw like a man's jaw, right? You might even see a little bit of an Adam's apple start coming out. And of course, what happens? Males have far less body fat. So when the body fat starts going down, what happens to the female menstrual cycle in these athletes? It goes away. My sister, when she was an athlete, she wasn't on, yeah, I think she may have been on some PEDs, but probably not enough for me to notice, because she was in a NCAA champion. She was NCAA, what do you call it? Field hockey champion for Columbia University. So they train every day, and you know, and what will that do? It goes increase the testosterone. If you increase the testosterone, you drop your body fat. What will happen to your menstrual cycle? You're gonna have some dysmenorrhea associated with it, because the estrogens and the progesterones will be out of balance to the testosterone. Because remember, all of us have all of these. Now, on the other side, I have a fraternity brother, and his nickname is Tiny. He's a very, very large man, and because of his fat content, he's got a lot of fat. For a guy, he has a lot of estrogens and progesterones. And it was funny, a couple of years back, he called my house, and his voice is like this. It's kind of like Michael Jackson, and it was so funny because my son goes, "Dad, there's this," and he speaks Spanish. So he goes, "There's a Spanish Michael Jackson on the line for you." And I'm like, "What?" And then I answer the phone and go, "Hey, ¿cómo está, baby?" And it was my boy Tiny, and I've been trying to get him to lose weight for the last 30 years, and he's eventually going to be one of my cardiac patients. But hey, is what it is, right? But his voice is like that. Every time when we were on a vacation and he took off his shirt, he had a lot. His body looks more like a woman than it was a man, because he has a lot of estrogens and progesterone secondary to all the fat content, and that is why women naturally have a 20 to 24% body fat. That's why when you see all these skinny models and all that, and these athletes, that is not a normal female body type. But the media and Hollywood and this is what they portray, and it's not real. And it's the same thing. Most guys, a guy shouldn't be having 3% body fat. Where when you could see it's the serratus muscles. I call them riblets. Those muscles on the side. Man, that's a little much, right? But that's what extreme athleticism can do. It can shave down all that body fat. You don't need to know the types of hormones. That's for your biochemistry class. We're not a biochemistry class. We're anatomy and physiology. And this is a nice little cute little picture regarding receptor hormone complex. We already went through this in Anatomy and Physiology 1. I think it was week 3, because I recall that lecture. I did that lecture this week for Anatomy and Physiology 1. Remember, on the cell membrane, there's those glycoproteins, and those glycoproteins have lock and keys that can open and close doors. So if a receptor, right, which is one of those lock and keys, a hormone attaches to one of those lock and keys, it's going to turn things on. So this, for example, here, a lipid-soluble hormone one would be insulin. So what would happen? I got insulin because I ate a big meal. It's floating around in my blood, right? Insulin would go here. It would attach onto the insulin receptor, and what would happen? There would be the protein channels will now let in the very large glucose molecule, so it can go inside, and then the mitochondria can then do its business. Because remember, the mitochondria needs oxygen and glucose to make ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Now, you could also see, like, if the hormones, especially the lipid soluble ones, they float around here in your bloodstream, and here is the plasma, right? So that's why when we do a plasma assay, we could see all those proteins and all those other hormones, and then we could look at those levels to see if my patient is signaling itself. And you could see here, remember we talked about energy? It requires cyclic AMP, ATP, adenosine triphosphate, turning into adenosine diphosphate. And this is the cyclic AMP cycle. You'll learn that maybe in biochemistry. You could see how it sparks. It requires energy. And it's going to even mess with protein pumps to change the solubility or what goes in and what goes out of the cell. Now, remember I just mentioned a second ago that, let's say, for example, we had something specific. You could see it fits into that triangle. It's lock and key specific. Let's say, for example, we had insulin, right? And it opens the back door. And to open a door, I need a little energy, and that's ATP. Now, here's the cool thing about exercise. You don't need insulin to open up those doors so that glucose can go in the cell. We have back doors that will activate this process, and they're called GLUT proteins, your GLUT2 and GLUT3 proteins. They only get activated when you work out, when you sweat, when your heart rate goes above 80% of its max. If you don't know what 80% of your maximum your maximum heart rate is, take the number 220 minus your age and then multiply that by 0.80 or 80%, and that should be your that's not your maximum heart rate, but that should be the heart rate at which you should be working out. When I'm at the gym, I watch so many people just hanging out, or they don't really do stuff. You should be moving so much that you barely can talk, and then that will do what? It'll open up the back door, glucose then can go in. That's why we're always telling diabetic patients, we don't give them insulin immediately, especially diabetic, diabetes mellitus type 2. We tell them, hey, you got to change your lifestyle. Of course, decrease of intake of your sugar, right? But you also have to go out and, go do something. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to, it doesn't mean you have to like go work out or do something specific. Do something you like to do, like dancing. My daughter, I don't think she's ever really formally worked out a day in her life, but she loves dancing, and she goes to a bi-weekly to her dance class. And those of you who are dancers, that's the stretching alone kills me in dancing. So, long story short, this specificity will activate a chain of events that require ATP, adenosine triphosphate, and it's going to change the configuration of the cell wall for it to do things. And one great example is insulin letting glucose into the cell so that the mitochondria can do its job. Now, how do you know when we need hormones? Okay, because there are times that I'm going to need more and I'm going to need less. Well, in the same way that we know that we maintain homeostasis, right? There's upregulation and downregulation, and it's due to the number of available receptors. So let's say, for example, right, I have a lot of insulin receptors, then I can have a lot of insulin interaction. Okay. So there'll be certain effects, and here are these three kinds. There's the permissive effect, right? Which means permissive. It allows things, okay, to happen, okay? For example, the relationship between iodine and your thyroid, okay? So dietary deficiency in iodine, which is part of your thyroid, can then what? Mess with other systems, including your reproductive system, okay? And also your, regarding iodine, also blood as well. Okay, so that's a permissive effect. One hormone messes with another. It allows another one to work. Then you have the synergistic effect. One hormone will enhance another one. For example, FSH And I already mentioned estrogens and progesterones. And we'll be talking about that in greater detail when we talk about menstrual cycle. Then you have antagonistic effects, and we already seen that in glycogen and insulin. Insulin is only taken when you ate a big meal. Glucagon is only released when when my patient hasn't eaten for a while and in a pre-starvation or starvation state. And just like homeostasis, there's a positive feedback, negative feedback, and your body is trying to constantly be in balance. But remember, your endocrine system is relatively slow. The change doesn't happen. Now, why is that important? Here's one example why it's important. We're going to be talking about in a moment some different hormones that relate to your gut, and different hormones that, when you eat food, it goes into your bloodstream and then goes up to your brain and then stimulates this place called your satiety center. When you're satiated, it means that you're full. That's why when you go to buffet and you've already eaten, like, six whole plates of snow crab legs, your stomach is really distended. You already unbuckled the first top part of your pants, right? You really don't care at this point. But then your body, when you look at it, it's telling you, I think I've had enough. But what happens when we see the dessert cart come around, right? You always say to yourself, and catch me if I'm wrong, right? You always say to yourself, nah, I got some room. Has anyone here ever done that? Because we're in America. Going to buffet it seems like it's a competitive sport. That's why now with my health, I do not go to any buffet, because it just keeps on challenging you to eat more and more and more. And there's a science behind it. My cousin works for Circus. He is one of the managers of their buffet and their food services. There's an entire science on the way they kind of trick you into eating what they want you to eat and doing what they want you to do. And there's a whole department of psychology based on it. One of them is the plate size. It's optimal for you to max out whatever you need to put in your stomach, that's why I don't like buffet. Well, I love it, I'll be honest, but I don't like it for my current health. So that is an example of, you're already full, but you don't feel full yet, because the hormones take a while to get up to your brain, because they have to be secreted into your blood and then get up to your brain and then tell your brain, hey, you're full, right? That's why you think you have a little bit more room to eat what you need to eat. That's why one of the tactics that my dietitian and my internist gave me years ago, which I kind of still practice to this very day. When you're eating a big meal, right? Like, let's say, for example, you go to a restaurant or whatever, eat only half. Try this. You eat half and then talk to your family, goof around for at least 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Then ask yourself, honestly, do I really want to eat the other half? If you want to eat the other half, then of course, go eat the other half. But 9 times out of 10, you'll start, I could do without it. I could live without it. And you'll start seeing you'll have better portion control, because if you wait the 20 to 25 minutes, it gives the time for those hormones to get up to your brain and tell you, hey, you've had enough. Okay, stop eating. And it takes a while, and it takes about 20 to 25 minutes. But I found that tactic doesn't work always, but it works a decent amount. And why are we doing this again? They did this already. We did this. And see, it's located at your base of your brain. It's this is your pituitary gland, and you have the anterior part and the posterior part. And we already talked about all these hormones. Luteinizing hormone, FSH, TSH. Yeah, we talked about all these. Why are they? I guess they're doing it again for laughs. Oh, here's just the physical location of your thyroid. right? Here's your thyroid cartilage, and here's your butterfly-shaped gland in your anterior portion of your neck, and this is your trachea. And I know it's my trachea because it has these cartilaginous rings right here. So, thyroid, thyroid hormone synthesis and homeostasis. So, as you can see here, we already talked about how T3 and T4 deal with your metabolic rate. So, your breathing, how your heart rate, and how fast you metabolize your food. Now, part of the control is when the mitochondria sense that, hey, we had enough, you see there's pluses and minuses that can control the negative feedback, and then it can control the release of thyroid stimulating hormone, okay? So just know that just like the nervous system, just like all the systems in your body, there's an accelerator pedal and there's a brake pedal, and it's depending upon what are the effects of what's going on. So if my heart rate is too fast, right, there's going to be elevated T3, T4. That's going to increase my heart rate, increase my respiratory rate, and then what goes? What will the signal now be to my this endocrine gland here? It will be to do what? Stop the thyroid stimulating hormone, and then it will promote a negative feedback. Okay, and the functions, of course, are metabolic, and it increases the ability to utilize ATP, and that's oxygen and glucose breakdown and utilization, and that also deals with your heart rate and your respiratory rate, because that's also part and parcel of your metabolism, because I can't utilize oxygen until I actually have to transport it and um, uh, change it and metabolize it and bring it into my system. Here is a goiter, right? This is when there's an itis of thyroiditis, inflammation or infection, right? Could have dietary iodine deficiency, but this is not a tumor. This is an endocrine problem. Okay. Now, hypothyroidism is when we have decreased thyroid hormones. Hyperthyroidism is when it's have increased thyroids. And hyperthyroidism, another form of it, is called Graves' disease. And of course, calcitonin, we already talked about that. We already talked about that. Is it just me or this book is going in circles? This is way too specific with the adrenal glands. We already talked about that because the different zones. We already talked about this, but you could see now how it's wash and rinse and repeat. What gland secretes what hormone to what effect, and to what effect is also what's it called? That it also defines the target organ or the target tissue. Yeah, they're just going around in circles. Oh, I hear. See, anabolic steroids. So anabolism is what? Ana means parts, bol means growth. These are typically used as PEDs or performance enhancing drugs. But if I give that to a female, what will happen? There'll be uptake of what? Testosterone. And then what's going to develop in my female patient? Over the course of time of chronic use of anabolic steroids, they'll develop male secondary sexual characteristics. They're going to start getting hair in all the wrong places. They're going to start having increased muscle mass. And of course, the one thing that we already know about steroid rage or roid rage, right? Increases in testosterone are also increase aggression. Because, man, you want to play sports, you better be aggressive. And this is your pancreas. And we're going to talk more about this and all its related structures. But remember, the pancreas, we talked about the alpha cells and the beta cells. And the alpha cell, think glucagon. Beta cell, think insulin. Delta cell and all that other stuff, and the pancreatic polypeptide hormone, nice to know. But these two, alpha and beta cells, glucagon and insulin, must know. And it also relates to diabetes mellitus. So what's DM, or diabetes mellitus? There's two things that could go on. Let's draw it out, since I promised a little bit of pathology. There's two types. Now, remember we talked about how it could be a hormone problem, and the hormone problem is insulin. Or it could be a receptor problem, and that's the insulin receptor on the cell membrane. Now, if it's a hormone problem, right, that's diabetes mellitus type 1, also known as insulin-dependent diabetes mellitus. So let's say you weren't born without a lot of insulin, or for whatever reason, all your insulin is gone, right? That's diabetes mellitus type 1, also known as IDDM, also used to be known as early onset diabetes mellitus. Now, if it's a receptor problem, that's diabetes mellitus type 2, also known as NIDDM, or non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus, because the problem is not the hormone, the problem is now the hormone receptor, right? And this is the diabetes that I'm developing right now, right? Because what happens when you're young, you got tons of receptor. And remember, think of this hormone as the key, and this is the lock. Those of us who lived in old buildings know what happens when the key gets used for like the last 50 years. What happens to the lock? It starts acting funny. It may not open, it may not close, and the key may not fit anymore. Now, this is also a grave concern in the American population, because we in America, we got a lot of things here. You wanna get tacos at 1:30 in the morning? Yeah, you can do that. There's a Taco Bell open 1 o'clock in the morning somewhere, right? Or go to a 7-Eleven and eat garbage. And what happens? You keep on eating a lot of things that are fat laden. It makes you use the insulin receptor a lot. So what's going to happen? The insulin receptor, or the lock, right, to open up the door, gets broken. And if it gets broken in either of these two situations, glucose can't go into the inside of the cell. If it can't be used on the inside of the cell, do you think our patient's going to have any energy? Two things are going to happen. They're going to feel weak, and the other thing, their gas tank is going to be empty. So they're going to eat, right? Right? Question, right? But that's what happens in diabetes. And that's why we're very, very afraid, because I always have the analogy of diabetes is it's like going to a gas station, right? And instead of filling up your gas tank, let's say this, the key to your gas tank is broken, right? Which is your insulin receptor. So now I keep on eating, right? So all the gasoline or glucose is coming into my car, but the lock is broken. So now all I have to do is, now I'm pouring gasoline all over the hood of my car, and it might get on some of my seats. It's going to get on my tires. Now, is that glucose, or is that gasoline? Is that good for my car on the outside? No, it isn't. Same thing with your human body. Glucose is only good to us inside the cell, being processed and metabolized by mitochondria to make ATP. Glucose everywhere else is one of those all of the above problems. Will it mess with your hair? Yup. Will it mess with your eyes? Yes. It will actually, diabetes mellitus will cause blindness within 5 to 10 years of its onset. It will cause blindness. It will mess with your kidneys. It will mess with your heart. It will mess with everything, because that fuel is dangerous. Glucose is a 6-carbon sugar, and it's very, very big. And if something that big is rolling around your system, it's like a bull in a very, very small china shop. So now you could now see that what are some ways to deal with that? First, I know this door is broken. Remember I mentioned there's a back door, right? Those GLUT2, GLUT3 protein. And the only time that those back doors open is during exercise. So that's number one. My patient has to be more active. Because I could give them insulin, right? That's another way I could solve the problem. But another way is, instead of me pumping gas all day, every day, what does my patient now have to do? They now have to considerably decrease their intake. So now, knowing and understanding this, now you know low fat, low salt, low sugar diet and exercise is crucial for my diabetic patient to live, instead of pumping them full of drugs. But a lot of people would rather have the drugs than actually having to change the lifestyle. Changing the patient's lifestyle is one of the hardest things they could do. Now, how could I ask this on an exam? I could ask, oh, what's diabetes mellitus type 1? What's the problem? Oh, the problem is what? Lack of insulin, or the insulin is broken. Diabetes mellitus type 2, also known as non-insulin dependent diabetes mellitus or diabetes mellitus type 2. What's the problem? It's the insulin receptor. It's typically burned out. Typically, DM1 develops early in life, but guess what we're seeing right now? National Kidney Foundation put out the new numbers for diabetic children with nephropathy. It's staggering. It's scary. Everyone's all bent out of shape regarding COVID. I'm more worried about all these kids with how can you have a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old with diabetes mellitus type 2? Guess what? Because that 6-year-old's probably been eating garbage since the day they could put something in their mouth, right? And me personally, I'm guilty as charged. I'm one of those parents. I'll just, I got a boatload of kids. I'll just give them some Wendy's and move on with my day, but I can't do that anymore. That's why I find it amazing. My first two are so healthy with my horrible parenting skill sets. We already went over that. So now you could see, let's start talking about some of the other hormones that deal with specific target organs, as we could see here. And then after that, we're going to talk about that video regarding stress and the hormone cortisol. So the heart, one really nice hormone is your atrial natriuretic peptide. Natriuresis is salt or sodium. So ANP targets the heart. And ANP deals with blood pressure, but it targets, let me re-say that. ANP deals with blood pressure, but the first initial target is sodium resorption in your kidneys. But we know that your kidneys deal with blood volume and blood pressure, which then, of course, affect your heart. And again, it's a classic example of how, even though we talk about all of these systems separately, they're all related. Now, there are several enzymes and there's several hormones in your GI tract. And one of the more famous ones, here's an example. There's some like gastrin deals with hydrochloric acid. Secretin deals with the chyme or the processed food in your stomach. And it also deals with the acid-base balance by releasing bicarbonate. CCK or cholecystokinin is in your small intestine, and we have pancreatic enzymes, those other enzymes, and also bile from the gallbladder, which is a emulsifier. So your gallbladder stores the bile that's created by the liver, and the bile, its function is to break down fat. along with the lipases that are in your stomach. So that's the GI tract. Kidneys, another thing that the kidneys do, and we're going to talk about the renin-aldosterone, the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system in a moment. Another thing that the kidneys do, since they're so exposed to all your blood, is they monitor how much blood you have in your body, and if you need more, it releases EPO, also known as erythropoietin, to signal your bone marrow, your red bone marrow specifically, to make red blood cells. We already talked about calcium, vitamin D. Vitamin D and your skin and your exposure of UV radiation also deals with your skin and your bones. Adipose tissue, leptin. Leptin, I always think leptin, lipid, it's nice to know. Thymus. You could read this on your own because this is a part of your discussion. So I'm going to leave that for you guys. And the liver we already talked about. And looky here. Look at this lovely chart that you could study that I could easily, can you easily make, what do you call that? An exam and then quiz yourself every day just for 5 minutes, right? Could you print this out and just fold it in half and then quiz yourself every day for 5 minutes? And then what will happen come test time? You'll know it and it'll be easy peasy. So let's go to the renin angiotensin aldosterone system, and then I could talk about jumping ahead of the game. Then I could talk about cortisol. Where is my favorite chart? Here we goes. This is my favorite chart. Okay. Let's get this. Okay. Let us look at this beauty. This is beautiful. Now, there's going to be a bit of you that says, oh my God, it's a lot. But remember, we talked about when we talked about concept maps, right? And how you can look at things visually. Can everyone see that there's one part here, there's another part here, and another part here that can be chopped in half? So instead of looking at how many items is this, like 16 different items, you're looking at it in pieces, okay? So the first piece is the stimulation piece, right? What stimulates the RAA system? That regulates blood volume, blood pressure, sodium, potassium, and hydrogen ion. And if it messes with hydrogen ion, that means it also deals with acid base, okay? So what's the impetus? What's the, what do you call it? What's the stimulus to how this whole thing is going to go down? Well, if you're dehydrated, you don't have too many salts because remember, wherever salt goes, water goes. Or maybe you bled out. Of course, that means a decrease in blood volume and of course a decrease in blood pressure. Doesn't that feel like an all of the above situation? They all go together. So what do we want to happen in the end? I want my sodium to go up. I want my water to go up. I want my blood volume to go up, and I want my blood pressure to go up. So the impetus is what? A deficiency. And the thing that I want at the end is what? Increase. Okay? So I can ask you, what's the function of the RAA? It's to increase. Increase what? All of these things that are related. Increase sodium, increase potassium, increase blood volume, increase and blood pressure. So that's these things. So how does it do that? It first stimulates the JG cells of the kidneys to release renin. The liver already has floating around in your blood angiotensinogen. Now, angiotensinogen, if you look at that and use your medical terminology powers, if you see in gen, it means creation of. That means it has to create something. So angiotensin, and angio means blood vessel, tense means what? To be tense, to increase its pressure. So angiotensinogen will do what? Will take renin and then go change it to what? Angiotensin 1. So from renin to angiotensin 1, and I already now know why, because I want to increase my blood pressure. So renin to angiotensin 1 requires angiotensinogen. And in my mind's eye, look at this picture. Close your eyes for a second. Can you kind of see the picture and the liver, and then you see the little kidney there? So I now, in my mind, this little kidney looks like a little J, and then right next to it is G. JG, juxtaglomerular cells. Renin, angiotensin, that's the name of the system. RAA, right? So it turns angiotensinogen into angiotensin 1. Angiotensin 1 has to be converted to angiotensin 2. And what is that? It's done by this enzyme called angiotensin converting enzyme, or ACE, and it's in a lung. So I need my lungs too. And you could see it as a picture. Right now I'm closing my eyes. I see a kidney, I see a liver, and I see a lung. Doesn't that look like a beautiful all of the above question? Doesn't that look like a beautiful sequence question? Who's the first organ affected? What is another organ that's required? And what's required to turn 1 into 2? Oh, ACE. Who releases renin? Oh, that's the kidney. Who releases liver? Angiotensinogen. What gets released by the liver? Angiotensinogen. Renin turns into 1, and then 1 turns into 2 because of the lungs. And I know what angiotensin means. Angio means vessel. Tense means to do what? To tense, or to make increase. So how do I increase blood pressure? Of course, I vasoconstrict my arterioles. And of course, the blood pressure will go up. Makes sense. But remember, I also deal with sodium, potassium, and water. So what else has to happen? Well, this little triangle cap, doesn't it look like an A? That's my adrenal cortex. Then what's going to be released? Aldosterone. So what's aldosterone going to do? It's going to increase sodium reabsorption. So wherever water goes, wherever salt goes, water goes. So if my kidneys keep salt, what will happen? All the water will be maintained. ADH will be released, right? And then what's going to happen? Increased blood volume, increased blood pressure. So look at this in 3 steps, 3 parts, right? And if I'm keeping sodium, something else has to be in balance and something has to give. So who gets thrown out? Potassium and hydrogen ion. Okay? So that's part 1, part 2, part 3. This part 3 deals with kidneys. We now know we're going to use our medical terminology powers. And by the way, let's think of it this way. All these little things like renin, angiotensinogen, and playing around with this chemistry here, these are all the tactics utilized by internal medicine and pathology to deal with your blood pressure. So let's say, for example, you have a high blood pressure. All of this gets promoted because in high blood pressure. So does anyone know this drug called an ACE inhibitor? If I inhibit this, then my blood pressure won't rise. If I do a diuretic, which is the exact opposite of this, then I won't have increased blood volume. I'll have decreased blood volume, and my patient will pee all day. What will happen to my blood pressure? Decrease. I block renin, guess what? This won't go down, right? So, oh, by the way, and what is the most common side effect for ACE inhibitor? It's cough. That's why if you see anybody who's like, maybe some of your professors have this dry cough, and every other 5 seconds they're going like that, they're on an ACE inhibitor. Okay? Does everyone see how this and what's it called that? How this and your concept maps, how they're invaluable on how you're going to keep this in memory. Oh, by the way, all you future nurses, this is definitely an NCLEX question. All of these. When I was prepping my daughter, I saw a ton of NCLEX type questions like this because it deals with a lot of the things you do as nurses. You monitor blood pressure. You also monitor blood volume and urine output. You also monitor your, what do you call it? Your electrolytes, potassium, hydrogen ion, and sodium. And you also monitor pH in the blood. Gee, this is your whole day in nursing in just one picture. That's why I love this picture. Okay, and you know what? Let me save it and make it available for you. Let's call it RAA diagram, and I'll make it available for you in Z Notes. Okay, good. All right, with that being said, we're at the home stretch. Hang in there. I can sense you're yawning, because I'd be yawning too. This is, I'm trying to be as animated as possible, but this is a relatively complex thing. Now, let's look at, if you watch these videos, they're going to talk about stress. Now, what does stress do? And we already know a little bit about the endocrine system now. So if I scare you, right, in the short term, the acute, all right, I only have to do that once to make an arrow. Oh no, I have to do it twice to make an arrow. If you're scared, acute, your initial reaction is, of course, increased adrenaline. That's a hormone from your adrenal gland, also known as epinephrine. So what's going to happen? This is part of your fight or flight stimulus. In your body, your autonomic nervous system, there's two sections. There is sympathetic, which is your fight or flight. And then there's your parasympathetic, what I like to call feed and breed. Okay? So what happens in the sympathetic? Of course, if you're in a fight or flight, right, the initial response to being scared, which is an emotion, will trigger this. Increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, and dilatation of pupils. And this is how you remember it's dilatation, or your pupils get really, really big. If you're in a fight, or if you're running away from your neighbor's pit bull, don't you have your eyes wide open? Shouldn't there be as much light going into your eyeballs so you can see every punch coming at you and see every venue of escape? So this is the basic outlook, as basic as it gets for sympathetic. And what triggers it? Adrenaline. Now the parasympathetic is the exact opposite. Okay? So it makes sense. If you're hungry, are you all ramped up? No, you shouldn't be. When you're hungry or having a good meal, you're relaxed. And also breed, right? Or if you're feeling libidinous, the more vulgar term is the word horny, right? Should you have, there's an initial increased heart rate and blood pressure, but you should be in the relaxed mode, right? It should be, it goes, you should have the exact opposite. Constriction of pupils, because you're in a relaxation mode and an enjoyment mode. Here, this is not enjoyment. Here, if you're in a feed mode, shouldn't all your hormones regarding food be increased? But who in their right mind, when they're in a fight or when they're running away from somebody, you're running away from somebody, maybe a killer clown or something like that, right? Are you going to stop and say, oh my God, I would love some donuts? No, you're too busy what? Running, right? So sympathetic is here, and the initial response is increased adrenaline. And you can now see how your emotions or your perceptions of reality or fears will then trigger your endocrine system. Now, what happens when the fear is prolonged? Now chronic. Like now, with all the fear that's going on. You are now going to have this response. You're going to have from your adrenal gland will now increase cortisol. And what will cortisol do? It will decrease inflammation. And we already learned that inflammation is our front line. It is our front line defense, front line immune defense. It's the easiest way to say it, right? So you could see now what this whole situation and mass media and all the riots and all the horribleness going on, you watch enough of it, what's going to happen? Your adrenal gland will start increasing cortisol. Then you're going to have decreased inflammation. Therefore, you will now be immune compromised. That's why now American Psychiatric Association, American Psychological Association, also you name the health association, they're telling everybody to do what? Take a break from social media. Take a break from watching news. Go out. Go do something, right? You know, and take your mind off of what all the stressors that are going on right now. Before this whole COVID thing, remember how they used to always say that February and March is the cold and flu season? Oh, maybe it's because of the weather. Then if that's the truth, then why in places like Florida and Texas, it's still cold and flu season when the weather down there is much nicer than up here or maybe in, you know, Maine or Vermont? It's because what happens in December? All of us spend, well, majority of people, I don't want to lump you guys onto my horrible spending habits, right? Well, me, I go nuts. Right now, I'm like Amazon and eBay master because I love the holidays and I want to buy stuff for my family, but sometimes you go a little nuts. When do you get the bill? You get the bill when, right? End of January, early February. What else happens in January and February, especially February, around mid-February, right? Taxes. Then you get the little bit of brush of sore throat, right? And then decreased inflammation. I can't fight off that sore throat. And then that pathogen can go down south, right? Because this is also a consideration, especially now when you have this deadly virus flying around. Which, by the way, there are other deadly viruses flying around. And that's why I'm so hell-bent on the diagnostic criteria, because guess what, folks? Common cold is also a coronaviridae. There is no documented proof that the current testing system is not making false positive for the other coronaviridae family strains, which there are more than 300 of them. And that's bothering me dearly. It's since March. But hey, I'm not going to let it get to me because why? I got other things to think about. Now, how can we use this in a clinical setting? All of us have seen crackheads, right? We're all nuts. They have increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, and what about their pupils? Because now they're having what? The drug is now mimicking fight or flight. And then what happens if someone smokes a whole bunch of weed, right? I saw it in a movie. There's decreased heart rate, decreased blood pressure, constriction of the pupils, and then you get the munchies. And then you feel what? You feel in love, right? And that's your parasympathetic. So you could see how drugs mimic hormones and how we could see things, especially regarding hormones, you could see things clinically, as in the case of your autonomic nervous system, sympathetic versus parasympathetic. All right, that's a mouthful. I was good today.